Brexit and Trump are a generational revenge. This may partly be against millennial certainty and superiority, and, indeed, ageism. And it may be a natural part of population dynamics. Not only are more people getting far older than ever before, but they are older for longer than they are young. Catch-22's admirers cross boundaries, ideological, generational, geographical. Fairy tales cross generational lines, and how you respond to them depends on when in your life you're seeing them. Nowadays, Skype is a generational way of putting both people on camera at the same time. When I began experimenting, people weren't ready for it. Once it's in its second and third generational stages, people can accept it. There's a final exam in venture every 4 to 6 years. The scary thing is you need to get an A in every discipline. You need to be on generational planning, need to be on great deal flow, need to be on great outcomes, you need to be on great company building. The thing I've always admired about Eagles fans is that it's not fans, it's family. It's generational. Generational disinterest in education means that too many young children lack the push from their parents in early years, which can make the difference between success and failure in schools. Adolescence was only recognized as a life stage in the early 20th century, when psychologists got down to work. Today's generational battle obscures the fact that adulthood is happening later. A new transitional stage has emerged after adolescence, the 20s. I think that there is a generational change, where new generations that have grown up always having access to the internet have a somewhat different view in terms of personal information and what needs to be kept private. There's this pressure to perform in your 20s. I think it comes from this whole generational foreshadowing that presumes there will be a whole other layer of things to worry about in your 30s. Growing up with my mother, who grew up during World War II, being half Filipina, half Okinawan, and literally running around the jungles in the Philippines escaping Japanese military chasing after them, I grew up with what they deem now as trauma, generational trauma. We live in an age of generational turmoil. Baby boom parents are accused of clinging on to jobs and houses which they should be freeing up for their children. 20-somethings who can't afford to leave home and can't get jobs are attacked as aimless and immature. Generational thinking has always been reductive and condescending. We haven't won a Super Bowl in, I think, 50 years, so the Jets fans who are out there are diehard Jets fans. It's like generational fandom. People who bet against the internet, who think that somehow this change is just a generational shift, miss that it is a fundamental reorganizing of the power of the end user. The internet brings tremendous tools to the end user, and that end user is going to use them. I will continue to look for opportunities to tell stories that speak to a fresh generational, topical and multicultural point of view. With every resurgence or generational turning, fashion and music becomes reiterated. What I've been surprised by is not how different people are, but how similar they are. There are certain types of Airbnb people, and they are in every city in the world. It's just that in some cultures, there is more of a generational divide. There's a huge generational gap between the Soviet school journalists and the new journalists. We were not brought up working on propaganda. We were brought up in the new Russia, working on the news. Music, rock and roll music especially, is such a generational thing. Each generation must have their own music. I had my own in my generation, you have yours, everyone I know has their own generation. And we have not found any generational gap at all. If he wants to go a football game, he goes. If I want to go to a fashion show, I go. We don't have to do everything together, but we like doing most things together. Post 9/11 Blues is an observational satire about the surreal circus of fear at that time. It's a generational thing. I don't feel the need to prove myself by writing the next generational novel. The rationale for tenure is still valid, but the system has turned the academy into one of the most conservative and costly institutions in the country. Yes, conservative. Economists joke that their discipline advances one funeral at a time, but many fields must wait for wholesale generational turnover before new approaches take hold. I think that I am misunderstood because people perceive me to be a certain way because I am generational. They expect me to be entitled and expect me to have things early on. I think people misconstrued that honestly. It's almost a rite of passage for the middle-aged, it seems, to invent generational stereotypes for dumping on the young. I want to have generational money. Everybody knows they're on the Obama team. There isn't vice presidential versus presidential division, there's not a generational pull. People have internalized that this is a real moment in history. Generational change within a genre is hard to parse while it's happening. Only in retrospect can the passing of the baton from ancestors to progeny be clearly discerned. Maybe it's a generational thing, but I never wanted to be the best black dancer in the world. I just wanted to be the best. Now we have a generational threat struggle called Islamist extremism. I'm a bred musician, this is generational. For me to just limit myself to rapping is a discredit to my bloodline. The 60s may be idealized in the movie from a cultural point of view, but the decade was all about discord and a big generational split that was very painful. The McMahons are generational promoters. Vince's grandfather was a promoter way back in the day, and obviously, his father was a very, very famous promoter. I definitely don't think of myself as someone identified by region. It's too far-flung a region, for starters, and southern New Mexico is very isolated. I wouldn't think of my identity as generational either, but maybe as more stylistic, in the school of realism and domestic issues. Widening the talent pipeline sufficiently will require a generational commitment to teaching math and science, providing technical training, and mentoring young people of all backgrounds so they understand the full range of possibilities that a career in technology affords. When Bill Clinton chose Al Gore in 1992, from the same generational, ideological, and geographical background as his, it underscored his campaign's central argument that this was a clash between the past and the future, that "Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow" was indeed the campaign's anthem. Brexit and Trump had upended the fundamental establishment viewpoint that politics was aspirational, that good politics promised progress, generational betterment and ever-expanding world reach. It's a generational thing. It'd be great if some kids grew up with me as that Jason Bourne figure. My father told me abuse is generational. The 1950s felt so safe and smug, the 60s so raw and raucous, the revolution stacked one on top of another, in race relations, gender roles, generational conflict, the clash of church and state, so many values and vanities tossed on the bonfire, and no one had a concordance to explain why it was all happening at once. Our pandering politicians compete to add names to the dependency of entitlement roles instead of evaluating the success of these programs by how many people leave the dole and are restored to an independence. And these bulging entitlements are saddling our offspring with unsustainable generational debt. Hard work pays off, but it doesn't stop now. I know I'm generational wealthy, as you can say, but still got business to handle. Being a parent gives you historical perspective. You have thoughts about how you fit into a larger generational drama, those who came before and those who will come after. I think the most pressing issue in our community is probably a generational divide. Hopefully in the future, generational challenges will be measured by achievement, not gender. Blockchain technology represents a generational opportunity to mutualize database infrastructure across entities within financial services. What that translates into is an enormous cost-saving, risk-reducing, and capital-enhancing opportunity. When another editorial pops up denouncing millennials for some perceived generational flaw, I take it with a Miley Cyrus-sized grain of salt. I have 2 daughters, one an open book, one a locked box. So the question of privacy is a challenging one. How much do kids need? How much should we give? How do we prepare them to live in a world where the very notion of privacy opens a generational chasm? Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.